Wednesday, which means Women's Wednesday. I am Taylor, and this is America's Web Radio. So this morning we have a very special guest with us. Her name is Shirley Millicans. Good morning, Shirley.
Good morning, Taylor.
How are you?
I am doing well, thank you very much.
Good, yes. Trying to get through this rain that just never seems to stop in Atlanta.
Yes, it seems like it's Noah's flood.
Yes, it definitely does. Well, first, I wanted to say thank you so much for coming on the show today, and very much looking forward to hearing about your migration to the States. So wanted to just offer you the floor to just offer a little bit of background for our listeners.
Thank you, Taylor. And before I begin really talking, first of all, I'm very humbled to just even talk about myself. Because if I can even reach one person and they find what I'm saying interesting and I can be authentic, then I would have fulfilled the reason for doing this interview.
Absolutely.
So I'm grateful for this opportunity to talk to your listeners.
Yes, and we are very happy to have you on. So again, thank you very much.
So the story about my migration or immigration to the U.S. began a very long time ago, nearly 45 years ago. I was born in India, and I had just finished my undergraduate degree in English literature. And my brother, who is 1 year older than me, and my younger sister, who's 7 years younger than me, all three of us were going to make a trip to the U.S. to visit my uncles. There were two uncles, two of my mom's brothers, who were living in Dallas, Texas at that point. So we came to visit them, and my aunt, my uncle's wife, had gone to SMU, Southern Methodist University, in the 60s and had graduated with 2 degrees, one in elementary education and one in theology.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom's oldest brother, Patrick Dice, was at the Perkins School of Theology doing his master's in divinity. And we were sitting and talking, and first of all, just coming to the U.S. was a big thing because that was our first visit, and this was back in 1973.
Mm-hmm.
So it was exciting to be in Dallas, to be with family, to hear about their experiences. And my aunt asked me, she says, what are your plans, for the future? And I said, I haven't really thought about it. I've thought about doing, a master's degree. And she said, would you like for us to explore the possibility of your going to Southern Methodist University to get your graduate degree in elementary education?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I hadn't really thought about it, but I said the opportunity sounds very interesting. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do with the master's in elementary education, but I'm a learner and have always been a learner. So I decided I'm going to go ahead and explore that opportunity. And as it happened, I got admission, changed my tourist visa to a student visa,
Mm-hmm.
and went to Southern Methodist University and got my master's in elementary education. And it was interesting because as part of the master's, I had to do a semester of student teaching. And I student taught in University Park Elementary, which is part of the Highland Park school system in Dallas, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And I did my student teaching in third grade. Now, the campus is very close to the university. So, and these are all, the school is located in a very upper middle class to wealthy people.
Okay.
So the kids attending the school were all from, well-to-do families. But I had such a great experience there, and that's what turned me on to education.
Mm-hmm.
And after I finished my student teaching, I was able to get a job in a private school teaching 5th grade and 8th grade, and that was another great experience. And then from there, I went into the public school system and taught in the Dallas public schools for 10 years. So that's how my foray into elementary education started. And I have been in education now for 34 years.
Wow.
And retired in 2010. And I'm so grateful for all of the opportunities that I've had throughout my teaching career.
That's
And
phenomenal.
now I'm on a different path after retirement.
Okay, and let me ask you this. So obviously you came to the States, went to Dallas, Texas, to be with your family. Now, what were your parents' thoughts on all of this? Were they on board to have their 3 kids just up and relocate to a completely different country, or what were their thoughts?
So I think not only in India, but everywhere in the world, parents' hopes are for their kids to get a good education.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very primary in my parents' minds. As a matter of fact, all 3 of us went to private Catholic schools growing up, all the way from kindergarten through 12th grade. And then I even went to a private Catholic college for my undergraduate degree, and so did my sister and my brother. So our parents, and they made tremendous sacrifices for us to go to private school.
Absolutely, I can
because my
only
dad
imagine.
used to work for Air India, and he was posted as the airport manager for Air India in many places in the Middle East. He was even in Tanzania. And my mom stayed with us in India, and my dad was abroad, so that our education would not be interrupted.
Mm-hmm.
And for the summer holidays as well as for the Christmas holidays, we would always be traveling to wherever my dad was.
Okay.
So growing up, I traveled. My dad was in Tehran. He was in Cairo. He was in Cairo twice. He was in Tanzania. He was in Indonesia. And while my dad was in these places, we were able to go to these places and travel from there to Europe and London, and had a great experience. So my parents education to them was very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing is that my brother and sister went back to India in 1973.
Oh, wow.
And I remained here to do my master's in elementary education.
What made your siblings want to go back?
They had no interest in going for higher studies.
Okay. So are they...
My brother wanted to just stay in India, and my sister at that point was still in high school, so she was not even in college.
Oh,
and
so still very
it
young.
It was not an option for her to stay on.
Okay. So are they still in India to this day, or have they migrated back to the States?
they have not. My sister has immigrated to the United States, and she lives in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. But
Okay.
my brother still lives in India. He has a son who is here and a son who is in India. But they travel back and forth. They're always visiting the United States.
Okay.
So it's always nice to have them. And then my sister and her family are here. All her kids are here. So we get together.
Good.
So it's nice to have family here as well as in India.
Yes, and that makes for some fun family trips. Either everybody's going to India or everybody's coming to the United States.
Exactly, and that's the best part because, you know, if there's a family wedding, then everybody is together. Or if there's a family wedding in India, then we all go there. And it's just the closeness of family is always important.
Yes.
And we enjoy the experiences that we have of going back to India.
Mm-hmm.
Yet my husband and I, and my children were born here. We love this country very much.
Yes, that's good. And now, when you talk about these weddings back in India, it just made me think of this memory I have. So if you don't mind me sharing it, I was actually part of a Hindu ceremony wedding when I was younger. My sister and I were both flower girls. And my mom was working for an OBGYN at the time who was from India, as was his wife. And their daughter was getting married, and they ended up doing a 3-day ceremony. So the very first day, they had the traditional Hindu ceremony. So we got to do the henna on our hand. We got to wear the saris. And I must have been in maybe 3rd or 4th grade at this time, and it was just such a cool experience. Though the wedding, I want to say, lasted around 4 hours. So as a kid, that was a bit difficult to have to sit through the entire thing. But they ended up having the next day a traditional Christian ceremony because she had married a man that had a Christian background. And then Sunday was their reception, and they had a bunch of huge inflatables and made it like a huge kids' day, but the adults were definitely jumping up and down on inflatables as well. But it was just such a cool experience to go from one day to the next. And we are actually going to take just a quick break here, but everybody stay tuned. This is Taylor for Women's Wednesday on America's Web Radio.
If your health insurance premium is more than your mortgage, Ellen Deal with Ideal Solutions is here to help.
You're doing
Whether you're
super.
a small business owner, individual family, or baby boomer, email
Thank you for listening, David.
By the way, I graduated from Texas Tech, and SMU had a football team that stunk.
Yeah. I don't remember much about the football because they were not the Mustangs were not that good.
No. We'll talk about it some Sunday, though.
Want to give your family or loved one the perfect gift? Then go online and check out the TornadoBodyDryer.com. I love mine and the warm heat air massage it gives me after my shower. The Tornado Body Dryer is super.
Okay, Shirley will be coming back shortly, okay?
Having one in your shower.
Okay.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Hey everybody, it's Taylor with Women's Wednesday on America's Web Radio. So before the break, we were touching on my experience being in a Hindu ceremony one day and then a Christian ceremony the next. So as a 3rd or 4th grader, this was a very incredible and very eye-opening experience because I got to see the difference between two cultures. So Shirley, now obviously you've experienced the two different sorts of weddings, and I think it's so cool that your family is able to go back and forth from the States and then back to India.
It is, and my brother's son, both of them, but before I go into that, let me preface it by saying that we were born Christian, and my parents and we belonged to the Church of England, and we grew up in the church. We grew up going to church. I was confirmed in the Church of England, and throughout my life, we have been church-going people.
Good.
But as we were talking about the weddings, so both my nephews got married to Hindu girls, so we had the same experience that you experienced.
Awesome.
Because there would be a traditional Hindu wedding, and then the next day there would be a wedding in the church. And we did do the henna, and we would do the big reception. So, yes, it is a 2 to 3 day event, and especially if you're traveling to another place. I was born in New Delhi, and one of my nephews got married in Lucknow, which is a town. It's a 2-hour flight from New Delhi. And we all went to that town and participated in the wedding. So blending those two cultures, not cultures really, two religions, it's been so rewarding for our family because as Christians we are called to love everyone. And in the Bible it says there's no Jew, no Greek. We're all one in the family of God. And so it's nice that in our family we have children from other religions. And the other important thing that I want to bring up is that my daughter got married to a young man who was born in Iran, but has lived here since he was 3 years old. And to have him in our life is such a blessing for us. So I am richly blessed with enjoying all of these wonderful people in my life.
That's beautiful, and that's, the melting pot that this country is all about, and it truly is a beautiful thing, and I'm so glad that you have such a great mix in your family. That's so interesting. Now, touching back on the immigration to the States, now you were how old at this time? You had just finished college, so early 20s then?
Yes.
Okay.
I was 23 years old.
23. And gosh, at 23, I cannot even imagine just uprooting everything that I've known, my norms, and just planting new roots somewhere else. Now, I did sort of do that, moving from Michigan down to Atlanta about 2 years ago. There were definitely more opportunities, and I flew down with 2 suitcases and said, this is my big shot. So, and I have been down here, and I love Atlanta so much. No offense to my friends and family back in Michigan, but it's a little bit warmer here.
Right.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, and, so as you were asking me that question of how it was to uproot myself.
Yeah, what was the most difficult part about leaving India?
Because my dad had been posted to different places in the Middle East, we had already been traveling abroad all the time. So the United States was a little bit further away than the Middle East and London, but it was not as difficult to come to the U.S., I think the difficulties were in adjusting to the college life at Southern Methodist University. And I want to explain that. Because I went to an all-girls school from kindergarten through 12th grade, and it was called Convent of Jesus and Mary, and then I went to the same name college, which was also an all-girls college. I had never really had the experience of being in a co-ed setting.
A little bit different, I can imagine.
It was different, and I remember feeling very intimidated in having men in the classroom. And the other intimidating thing was that all of the people who were with me in my program were graduate students, so most of them were already teaching. And I had had no experience in teaching because I had just finished my undergraduate. So when we would have class discussions, I did not really have much to say because I did not have the experience that other people were bringing to our discussions about classroom discipline, about curriculum. But I still feel that it was such a great learning experience. And all of my book learning really came into play when I was doing my student teaching at University Park Elementary.
Good. Now, you had mentioned a lot of travel when you were younger, and I can imagine that made things a little bit easier when you were transitioning to a new place because you had been to so many different places. So for me personally, I'm curious why you didn't end up in London, or if London was in the mix, just because personally I did a study abroad trip during my last semester of college. I did a media ethics trip, and for only being there 2.5 weeks, London will always have a special place in my heart. We did our classes at the University of London, and it was great. So my question for you is, was London even in the running for a potential place to be, or did you always have your heart set on coming to the U.S.?
London was, no other place was in consideration to do a master's, because at that point, we were just coming to visit the U.S.
Yes.
So coming to visit the U.S. and then actually staying on to do my graduate degree was a decision that was made that summer of 1973 by my parents, and my agreement to go to school here. And it was an opportunity that I thought would be great because my uncle was a security officer on campus, and we didn't live that far away. And I'll tell you another challenge that I had was I knew how to drive in India, but I didn't have a car here. So, and I was working, to pay for my college degree. I was working in the dean's office 5 days a week from 8:30 to 5, and then going to classes 3 nights a week from 5:30 to 9:30. So I really didn't have much time to think about anything. I was just busy living, learning, and just living and surviving.
You definitely had a lot on your plate, so you're pretty much working a full-time job on top of going to school. And I can relate to that. I did the same thing. I went to a community college at first, and I was working full time during the day, and my boss was just so great. So anytime I had class, I would leave and then I'd come back, and I was there until the work was done. And then a couple of times I was actually working at a Cold Stone Creamery on Michigan State's campus, and I would do that for fun. That was my fun outside of working at a dental lab and going to school. So not much of a social life, not much time to really think about anything else. So I definitely feel you on that.
Yes.
Now, when you had first arrived in Dallas, obviously there are so many different almost little mini cultures throughout the U.S. and I feel like David can agree that Texas has its own sort of culture. Now, what surprised you, if anything, the most when you first arrived?
I remember this so vividly. So my uncle and aunt had taken the three of us, my brother, sister, and I, to Dairy Queen.
Dairy Queen.
To Dairy Queen. So I had a hamburger and French fries and a milkshake, and I remember thinking, my gosh, I've never eaten such a big hamburger. And the milkshake was so creamy, and the French fries were so greasy. It was just a delightful meal. And my brother and sister, of course, now in India, because of the globalization, you get everything, and you can have hamburgers, and you can have Kentucky Fried Chicken or pizza, Pizza Hut or whatever. You can have everything that you want. But at that point, I'd never had such a big hamburger, and that was just a delightful meal and very enjoyable. And it was interesting because while I was doing my studying, and I used to work in the dean's office, the lady that I was working with, Millie Hamilton, she was the secretary with Dr. Hoskins, and he was the dean of the graduate school. And I must say, even though he has passed, I must give a shout out to him because Dr. Hoskins financially helped me with paying for my graduate degree. And because I couldn't earn enough money, to pay all of it, and he would supplement it every semester with a little bit.
That's incredible.
And that was just so wonderful, and I stayed in touch with him, for after I graduated. But Millie and I, the secretary, just a delightful lady, she and I would go to lunch together every day, and many times we would go to Dairy Queen because it was just across the street from campus. And my favorite thing, of course, was the milkshake.
Oh,
and
they
I would
are
have
so
a
good.
strawberry milkshake all the time. And over the 2 years, Taylor, I gained like 10, 15 pounds.
That, I feel like, comes with eating American food for sure. Those milkshakes, those burgers, and those fries. I feel like a lot of people can relate to that, Shirley, but we are going to take a quick break. I don't mean to interrupt you. We're going to listen to these ads real quick, but everybody stay tuned. This is Taylor with Women's Wednesday on America's Web Radio.
Get your pen and paper ready. If there's a move in your near future, I'm here to tell you that the folks I used and now recommend is Around Town Movers. Timothy and the guys recently moved me, and I am and was totally satisfied with a sometimes not so fun experience moving.
Shirley, you having fun?
770-378.
It is enjoyable.
Good. I didn't know all this stuff about you. I can't imagine a hamburger making a dent in your size.
around town movers, in my opinion, are the
She's
best.
very tiny,
That's
very
around
petite
town
young
movers.
lady.
I bet.
Young lady. And her husband is bigger than a door.
On Fridays from 9 to 10 a.m. Join me as I talk with passionate professionals on a program
But
that
they're really
profiles
nice
best
folks.
businesses,
Well,
business
I'm definitely
practices,
enjoying talking to her. This is fun.
fascinating to get an insider
Yeah,
view
Taylor,
of
and
how America works.
it's interesting to hear about you as well.
Yes, I like to throw in little tidbits here and there, and I apologize if they're totally off the wall, but I think it makes things fun.
Oh, it does. Yeah, definitely does.
Okay, folks, we'll be coming back shortly.
Easy questions to help you determine if you can get away from Obamacare. As a 20-year veteran of the insurance industry, I'm here to help with all your insurance needs. Email ellendeal at maga45cag@gmail.com.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
All right, everybody, we are back on Women's Wednesday with Taylor. I am Taylor, and we have Shirley on with us. So before the break, we were talking about Dairy Queen, of all places, and that being one of the most surprising things. But were you surprised, Shirley, that all of those French fries and those delicious creamy milkshakes were going to add up eventually and catch up with you?
Oh, I was known when I would go back home during the holidays, I had become very pudgy.
Well, they call it the freshman 15 for a reason, so I think it's okay.
This was the graduate 15.
Well, you know what? It all happens. It happens to the best of us. And then there are some people that, even with working, once you pay your rent and you buy books, my goodness, that money that you thought you had so much, like $2,000 does not go that far when you're a college kid. That's for sure. I remember after going to the community college, I transferred over to Western Michigan University over in Kalamazoo, Michigan, over on the west side. And that I had so much money in the bank, at least I thought. And after I had paid my rent on my new apartment and bought books, which unfortunately I couldn't just go on Chegg and rent these books. Every single class my very first semester required a brand new book. And safe to say that $2,000 was gone with a blink of an eye. And
oh yeah.
But for me, I was always the type of person that would just never ask my parents for money. I always felt horrible, and it got to a point where like I started to lose a little bit of weight, and my mom was like, I'd go home and she's like, why are you so skinny? Are you eating? And I'm like, yes. And then she's like, you're not eating. You need to make sure that you're contacting me and blah, 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 blah. So it got to the point where every week she would make me text her a picture of what my refrigerator and my cabinets looked like to make sure I had food. But yes, there were a couple of spots in college where I did have to indulge myself, and there was a Chinese spot that we all loved, and that was it was Chinese food, and then this place called Two Fellas, and they had wraps that were probably 1,000 calories each, but they were so good, and the mac and cheese bites I think I still dream about every now and then. So now, when you talk about food and all of that, do you feel like there are do you have any sort of favorite restaurants that give you that taste of being back home in India? Because obviously the food here in the States is a little bit different when it comes to just those milkshakes, those hamburgers, and those fries.
Yeah. And, when I started teaching in Dallas and on a very, very small salary from a private school.
Mm-hmm.
Surprisingly, I dropped all that weight very fast
because you were so busy.
You mentioned, Taylor, when you're only earning $500 a month in 1975, and from that I had to pay my apartment, my car, my insurance, and all of the other bills. I didn't have much money left. And my refrigerator thank goodness my parents never came and looked at my refrigerator, was always empty.
The life of a college kid. You're either eating too much and gaining the weight or not eating at all and losing it. There's no in between.
Yes, and you know what? If I missed Indian food, because at that point there were not that many Indian restaurants, either in Dallas or here in Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and I didn't want to spend the money, even if there was a restaurant, to go and buy an Indian meal. So I would cook, actually. And then I would cook enough that it would last me 2 or 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, I would eat in the school cafeteria when I was teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Or I would just make myself a sandwich. And I remember eating Spam.
Oh.
Spam sandwiches.
No.
I have never eaten since then.
I would sure hope not. You probably had enough Spam sandwiches to last you a lifetime. You don't need to eat them again.
Yes.
Now, when it comes to just, or I should say, when it came to getting settled in, I mean, it sounds like this was a pretty smooth process, and from the start, just coming and being with family, I feel like is what helped you tremendously. But what was most helpful, other than the support of your family, for you getting settled in?
It was definitely the support of family, because I stayed during the 2 years that I was going to graduate school. I stayed with my uncle and aunt because my education was so expensive.
Uh-huh.
So that 2 years flew by so fast because I was so busy. And then after I moved out after graduation, I was on my own after that. So, but here is the thing that was very enjoyable, and that's how I came to really learn about the United States more thoroughly. And that was, my aunt and uncle had not been here long. And my uncle, who was doing his master's in theology from Perkins School of Theology at SMU,
Mm-hmm.
he became a pastor of a very small church in Culm, North Dakota. And so I remember that after my graduation, my mom had come over here, and so was my sister. And then my uncle and aunt and the three of us went on a camping trip to visit my uncle in Culm, North Dakota. So we camped all the way from Dallas through Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, and North Dakota.
Oh.
And Culm was such a small town, and my uncle was a pastor of a Methodist church, and the parsonage was right next door. And we drove into Culm, and my uncle had told us to immediately turn on to a radio station. And the radio station was welcoming Pastor Dias' family, who had just come to Culm, North Dakota, to visit them.
That's amazing.
So having all of those experiences, and by the way, that was my first and last camping trip.
I was going to say, the time of year to North Dakota, that's going to be a big factor.
Yes, but this was in the summer.
Okay, good. So you were safe.
So it was fine. We were all safe, but, living in tents and with rain pelting down on you in Kansas, and then going to the community restroom was not a pleasant experience.
Oh, I have only been camping, unfortunately, 3 or 4 times, and I'm not against it. I enjoy it, but I mean, for days and days and days on end, and it's not just a fun trip, like that sounds kind of miserable.
But Taylor, the other thing that I want to say to you is the fact that one of the advantages I had was, first of all, having family here.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, being educated in a a Catholic school in India. So language was not a barrier.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those two factors are important for immigrants who come. Because if you know the language, I think the transition is much easier.
Oh,
now, I have to say
I
that I
agree.
had a very heavy English accent, which I have kind of toned down quite a bit.
I can still hear it.
Yes, even though it's still there. But that was, I had to, and especially working with children, I had to really learn how to say things in American English.
Mm-hmm. And that's very different when you say English versus American English, because that just goes back to, learning languages in school. And I had taken Spanish for 4 years. Granted, I can understand it if it's spoken slow enough, but to speak it and have everything conjugate correctly and be grammatically correct, I would have a 0% on that. But I feel like when I would try to talk to some of my friends, because when I was in elementary school, I went to a very culturally diverse elementary. One of my friends, her mom was Chilean, and so she would constantly talk to her daughter, and so my colors, and numbers, a lot of just basic nouns I knew very well, but going into school and really learning it made it kind of difficult. And why they don't start teaching language before high school, I will never understand, because kids' brains are like sponges. It's just so much easier to learn something at a young age. But we were always taught, from what a lot of my friends had said, just a very formal way of speaking Spanish. And it was almost the traditional English, if that makes sense. So,
and that's the other difference. So coming from a convent school run by Irish nuns, and this is still true, in the Indian system of education, which is that it is more memorization in India than it is here. And so you have to pass the end of the school year exam to be promoted to the next grade level.
okay.
And that puts a lot of pressure.
I can
on
only
kids.
imagine.
Yes. So that was a difference in, moving from one grade to the next. There is no such thing as social promotion.
Which is good. That's how it should be, because I feel like a lot of kids get passed on to the next grade when they may not be ready. And you had touched on learning the language, and it reminded me of something which I will come back to after we take a short break, ladies and gents. This is Taylor on America's Web Radio.
Perhaps you are struggling to cope with the disease of addiction. If not, you probably know a family member or friend that needs help in battling the cravings and the personal and professional damage done by the effects of drugs or alcohol. Get a pen and paper and be ready to write down the following. These are the issues that the trained staff at the Atlanta Healing Center address and treat every day. Their doctors and counselors with over 40 years of practice in the field of addiction can treat the suffering individual in a thoughtful, compassionate, and experienced manner and guide him or her along the path to recovery. So call 770-696-9862 and speak to a knowledgeable staff member about how you or your loved one can be helped to enjoy a better and healthier life. More information is also available on the website at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
Good morning. My name is Mike Mizell. I'm a retired Army colonel and president of the Johns Creek Veterans Association. We meet in Newtown Park, and part of one of our projects is the installation of the Healing Wall, the half-scale model of the Vietnam Wall that traveled the United States. Well, it's coming to rest, and it's going to live in Johns Creek forever, the half-scale model. We're looking at possibly a March implementation ribbon-cutting ceremony, and we're looking for donors and sponsors that want to help us in this great project. You can donate at jcvets.org.
In 2009, the membership organization Docs for Patient Care was founded. People all around the country wanted to participate in the efforts of this group, and they wanted to join, but they were unable to do so unless they were physicians. It's for this reason that the Docs for Patient Care Foundation was created. Now, everyone can join the fight and become a member of an organization created by doctors for patients, dedicated to fighting for your healthcare freedom and preserving the doctor-patient relationship. While you're at your computer, please go to www.docs4patientcarefoundation.org. That's www.docs4patientcarefoundation.org and make a tax-deductible donation and join the fight along with us. Thank you.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
All right, we are back with Women's Wednesday. Now, Shirley, I was just about to touch on just a quick little tidbit when it comes to learning the language. One of my good friends, his grandpa was in Germany and had met his wife, and she had come back to the States with him after the war. Now, we referred to them as Oma and Opa, which is grandma and grandpa in German, and his Oma actually learned English watching the Saturday morning cartoons, which I thought was very interesting because that's something that kids go through, and they see a representation of whatever the word is, and then they get to hear the word. So
Yes.
I thought that was pretty interesting, and I mean, the fact that you had already been so well versed in the English language, I feel like was a massive advantage for you. So I was also,
It was.
yeah, and I know we've talked about so many different things. So I want to get back to this immigration piece now. Can you recall a time that you may have not felt very welcome? I know that's a kind of a touchy subject, but I'm curious if there's any times in particular that you can recall.
Oh, yes. There are several instances. Because I am brown-skinned, and being in Dallas, and even here, I have been identified many times as Mexican, as Filipino, till I open my mouth. And then people realize, that their assessment of me may not be true. And so we all have the tendency to look at people and make assumptions. And I think that it is important for us as human beings to first get to know people before making assumptions. And that has been a common occurrence, even if I walk into a store, Taylor, and people see that I'm brown-skinned. They assume certain things till, I say, may I ask you for some assistance with this and that? And then the whole demeanor changes. And I'm not sure if it is that people just make assumptions and don't want to act on those assumptions, or, they make an assumption and they may be fearful. I don't know what it is, but that's what has been my experience in, as an immigrant coming into this country.
Now, do you feel like you were at almost like a double disadvantage being a woman as well?
Not really. I never felt that.
Okay, that's good.
It was interesting because, I had enough confidence in myself to overcome any objections or any assumptions once I started talking with people. However, and this happens with all of us, that as you get older, you get more comfortable in your skin.
Mm-hmm.
And what other people might perceive or assume about you really has no bearing on you as you see yourself.
Mm-hmm. And you had mentioned just times of like going to a grocery store and something as simple as that, experiencing something that could be fairly negative. Now, did you have any experiences in your teaching careers with either students or their parents or even faculty?
I really, not in Dallas, I didn't, because after I taught in that private school, it was called St. Anthony's.
Mm-hmm.
It was a private school, and it was run by the Order of Jesus and Mary, the same order that my Convent of Jesus and Mary in India was run by. And I was teaching in that school, but most of the students there came from affluent African American backgrounds.
Okay.
So it was, for me, there was no difference there. And then when I went into the Dallas public school system, usually the newer teachers were placed in areas where other teachers didn't want to go. So I was in a very poor area of Dallas in the public school system.
Mm-hmm.
And the area was called Oak Cliff. And the kids there, majority of the kids were from free and reduced lunch. And I remember that my goal during the 4 years that I was there was to just teach my heart out to those kids.
Absolutely.
And, there were parents who would never come to parent-teacher conferences. And I remember very clearly one year, our superintendent, Dr. Linus Wright, had said that if teachers can complete all their parent-teacher conferences before the Wednesday of Thanksgiving, they can get Wednesday off.
Ooh, okay, a little competition.
I remember that was a great incentive for all of us teachers in the public school system.
Mm-hmm.
And we always tried to get, our parent-teacher conferences done. And I remember going to the homes of my students and looking at the poor conditions in which they lived. And there were times when I would go in and I didn't even know where to sit.
Mm.
It was that sad. And then the total opposite of that happened when I came and my husband got transferred to Atlanta. And I got a job in Gwinnett, and I was teaching third grade in a brand new elementary school. And I remember a mom coming into the classroom, and she looked at me. She knew this was my first year in Gwinnett, and she must have been concerned as to whether I was qualified enough to teach her child.
Ugh.
And so she started asking me a lot of questions, and as I talked to her, told her about my background, my educational background, I could see her demeanor totally relaxing.
Mm-hmm.
And she became one of my strongest supporters and supported me throughout with all of the things I would do in my classroom. She became very active. She would bring treats for the students and was always there to help, when I was doing small groups. So it is important for all of us immigrants, and even those of us like you who have been transplants from other parts, of the country.
Mm-hmm.
We all have to do some learning and acceptance of each other.
Yes, and especially when it comes to just the people that you're around. I mean, it's such a cliche, but you can't judge a book by its cover. You have no idea what this person's been through, in your circumstance, how very well educated they are. And I mean, there's just so many differences, but there's also a lot of similarities and so much common ground here too. So,
absolutely.
Let me ask you this: if you knew of somebody that was planning to migrate to the U.S., what advice would you give them, or what would you tell them to expect?
My main advice would be to do it legally.
Yes.
That is, to me, that is important because I did it legally. My husband did it legally. And certainly we want others to do it legally. I know that the process has become, not that it was any easier when I applied, but the process has become much more cumbersome now.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly, this country is built on immigrants.
Yeah.
If you think back to Ellis Island and how many immigrants came from Eastern Europe, through Ellis Island, all of us immigrants are trying to provide a better life for ourselves. And the USA has always been welcoming of immigrants. So first of all, to do it legally. And secondly, I see this happening quite a bit in other immigrant populations as well, not only Indians. Just like if you think about New York and you saw a little Italy being established, or little Ireland,
mm-hmm.
or little Chinatown, it's happening now. So having some sort of a support system to get you through the transition phase, and especially if you don't speak the language, that is very, very helpful. So that's the advice that I'd like to share with anybody, who's trying to come to this country.
That's phenomenal. And I really do appreciate you sharing your story and shedding some light on this topic, because like you said, I mean, this country is built on people that are immigrants coming to the States. So thank you so much again, Shirley. I really do appreciate it. And unfortunately, that is all for today, folks. This is Taylor on America's Web Radio with Women's Wednesday. We'll chat soon.
You're listening to America's...
Taylor,
Shirley, you still there? Shirley.
I am.
Good.
Yes, I am.
You did super. I'm going to vote for you to be the radio chairman at church.
Thank you so much, Shirley. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Taylor. It was my pleasure, because it was so enjoyable to hear you as well.
Yeah.
Was Sydney listening?